You're listening to the I'm Busy Being Awesome podcast with Paula Engebretson, episode number 291. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Right off the top, I just have to acknowledge I have been very sick over the last couple of weeks. In fact, one of those weeks, I literally had no voice whatsoever. And as you can probably hear in this recording, it is still coming back. So first and foremost, I apologize for my voice and that this is probably what it's going to sound like for the next couple of weeks. Thank you for sticking with me. And second of all, I'm so glad you're here today because we are diving into a topic that I think you're going to love. And it was inspired by one of my incredible clients. And she asked this question a couple of weeks ago that's really stuck with me. And she asked, why does it seem like a lot of us ADHDers are often so focused on what we can't do? And she explained how she often catches herself saying things like, well, the problem is, or I can't because, or I would, but. And what really hit home when we were talking about this was how she mentioned even when she's faced with an opportunity to work on a project that she actually wants to do, or a new idea that really kind of lit her up initially, her brain immediately goes to the reasons why it wouldn't actually be possible or why they really shouldn't do it. Right? I would, but I could, but I mean, do these phrases sound familiar? Do you ever notice sentences like this in particular areas of your life? I know I have certainly seen this in myself, especially in areas where I've already felt discouraged or disappointed in a similar situation in the past. Maybe I've tried something similar before and it didn't work out. Or I notice it if it's an unfamiliar situation and I'm faced with the reality of actually needing to try something without any real knowledge of how it's going to go. Now, I don't see it in all situations because there are also times where I am so excited about a new idea or a project that I just dive in instantly and would, frankly, probably benefit from a little more deliberation. But I think that my client is really spot on with this observation. I think there are these unique situations, especially when we've tried to do something similar before, where instead of getting excited about what's possible, our brains instead zoom in on and highlight every potential obstacle or reason why that new idea, that new thing won't work. And if you can relate to this, be sure to stay tuned throughout the episode because today we are talking exactly about that. Why this experience happens, why so many of us do default to that I can't because perspective, and how we can shift it. We're going to look at how we can move from problems to possibilities so that we can stop spinning in all those reasons why not and start stepping into what we want to create and how we can do it. So first up, let's talk about why this happens. Why do so many of us tend to default to focusing on the problem instead of the possibility? And today I want to look at 5 key reasons. Okay, so let's unpack these together. The first reason is the human brain's negativity bias. Okay, our brains, all human brains, not just ADHD brains. Okay, I'm talking about all brains here. They are wired to keep us safe. Okay, they are always scanning for danger, looking for what could go wrong, finding ways to protect us. And it's often talked about as the motivational triad. Okay, so our brains are wired to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy. So what this means is that back in the day, which was a Wednesday, our ancestors focused on the loud noise in the woods. They assumed there was danger and ultimately avoided getting eaten by a predator. Yay, thanks, brain. Good job, right? Now, in today's world, that same bias, that same search for threat shows up in much less life-threatening situations, like overanalyzing a project idea or hesitating to try something new. And this is true, again, for all brains, not just ADHD brains. But when you add ADHD to the mix, we also bring in this tendency toward rumination, okay? Where we loop and loop and loop. So it makes sense why we tend to get stuck on those open question loops quite a bit easier. And why we're worrying, well, what if they think my idea is dumb? Or what if I mess this up? Or what if I fail again? And instead of focusing our brain on the possibilities, we are looping, we're stuck on what could go wrong. Okay, so that's reason number one, that negativity bias. And as we go through the remaining four, you'll probably notice how they all kind of fall underneath the overarching umbrella of the negativity bias. Okay, so reason number two, perfectionism. I love that on perfectionism. My voice broke there because I really want to stop it, but I'm not going to. I'm going to keep recording here. Perfectionism, reason number two. So as we know, since I talk about it all the time on the podcast, both front end and back end perfectionism hit hard for so many of us, obviously myself included. And even if we are people who don't typically resonate with perfectionist tendencies, when we think about today's topic, with our brain spinning on why we can't or why we shouldn't do something, perfectionism is usually hiding somewhere in the shadows. Okay? So the challenge here is that this flavor of perfectionism can show up in a whole lot of different disguises, and it tends to kind of sneak in through the side door. So we don't always know it's there. We don't always see it at first. But at the heart of it, this perfectionist part tends to believe, well, if I don't start, I can't fail. It feels a little bit like we protect ourselves from the pain of messing up. So again, as a throwback to our first obstacle, number one, we're avoiding pain. But at the same time, it's really important for us to recognize the truth here, which is not starting is actually failing ahead of time. It's kind of like hitting the brakes before the car even starts moving. And let's be honest, how many times has avoiding failure by not starting truly felt better in the long run? My guess is not many, right? My guess is that most of the times, if you're like me anyway, right? My guess is instead of finding ourselves feeling relief, we're instead stuck in regret and frustration because we're thinking about how we, quote unquote, missed an opportunity. So that is reason number two, perfectionism. Reason three is our fixed mindset. Now, a fixed mindset, this is the belief that our abilities and our traits are essentially set in stone. Okay, it's that voice that says, I don't know, I'm just not good at writing. Or I've never been able to stick to my routine in the past. Why bother trying now? Or every other time I've tried to do something like this, I've failed. So I can't imagine this time would be different. I just can't do it. These are all very fixed mindset beliefs. And the leading voice in this space of fixed mindset and growth mindset, is someone named Carol Dweck. She has a brilliant, groundbreaking book out there. It's called Mindset. I will link to it in the show notes. I've mentioned it before. I highly recommend it. But this is another big obstacle for us, that fixed mindset. And as you hear me say some of these fixed mindset thoughts, right? I don't know, I'm just not good at it. Why bother trying? My guess is if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, some of you might even be thinking, that kind of sounds like black and white thinking or all or nothing thinking that we talk about a lot when it comes to an ADHD brain. And if you thought that, you're right. Okay? A fixed mindset is all about being cognitively inflexible. And what Carol Dweck shows us is that it is possible to maintain and even increase our flexibility by practicing that growth mindset, even when we have a relatively inflexible ADHD brain. Okay? Now, since ADHDers are prone to inflexible thinking, right, that cognitive inflexibility, it's easy for us to get stuck in the fixed mindset and believe that we can't, right? So that's another core component there, is the fixed mindset, that cognitive inflexibility. Then we get to number 4, which is overwhelm. Oh, overwhelm, we know you so well. It seems to show up in every reason, right? Whenever we're doing a list of why this happens, overwhelm seems to be there. But overwhelm plays a big role here because it often moves in when we're thinking about doing something unfamiliar or complex or just big. It's that moment when everything seems like too much and suddenly all those executive functions that might otherwise help us plan or prioritize or get started, those executive functions basically take a sick day and leave us high and dry. And when we're overwhelmed, those smallest tasks seem insurmountable. So instead of thinking about how to take that first small step or get started, our brain goes into shutdown mode. And it's like, I don't know, where do I even begin? It's too much. I'll just, scroll Instagram instead. And when we don't know how to start or how to break something down into those manageable steps, it's so much easier to focus on what's not working or why it won't work. It's so much easier for the brain to go, I could, but I don't know. It's too hard. I just don't have the time. I can't handle this. Maybe some other time. And just like that, we're stuck in problem mode instead of possibility mode. So that is reason 4 of 5, overwhelm. And then finally, we get to reason number 5, which I'm labeling self-protection. Okay, let's talk about self-protection, which I think plays a really big role here. And it is a little bit like looking through a different lens at the motivational triad we mentioned in reason number 1. But I think it's worth looking at it through this lens as well. So I don't know if any of you saw Inside Out 2, right? The second Inside Out movie. But I think about self-protection kind of like that new character introduced named Anxiety when they are literally spiraling in the movie. Okay. Self-protection is when our brain steps into this overprotective friend mode who says, don't put yourself out there. It's just going to hurt. Don't do that. What are you doing? And honestly, the friend isn't wrong. They have receipts. They've seen it happen. I mean, just think about it. You've probably experienced failure, rejection, shame in the past, and your brain remembers. Maybe you've tried something new before and it didn't go well, or maybe someone told you that you're not cut out to do this thing or something that you really wanted to do. And those experiences stick with us. And they create this little warning system that says, hey, remember how much that hurt last time? Let's not do that again. Let's just go over here and play it safe. I can't because I don't think this will work because. And here's the tricky part. This protective mechanism, it doesn't just shield us from potential disappointment. The problem here is that it prevents us from ever doing new things or trying something new or learning new skills or creating new success. Essentially, it's there to keep us stuck. Instead of trying and learning and growing, we're instead focused on why something won't work. And we say, well, I shouldn't even bother, or what's the point? Because it feels so much safer to stay in our comfort zone. Now, here's what I want us all to remember, okay? This self-protective part, it is well-meaning, right? And it's okay that it's there. It's doing a good job, but it doesn't have to be in charge. So we can thank it for trying to keep us safe, right? Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I know you're trying to do your job, but also I've got this. Even if it doesn't go perfectly, I can take care of myself. I'm not going to beat myself up. In fact, I'm going to be really proud of myself for trying. Okay? So that is reason number 5 why so many of us tend to get stuck in that problem-focused mindset is self-protection. Now, the thing for all of us to remember here as well is that all of this is a totally human response. Nothing has gone wrong here. If you notice that you're tipping toward the negativity bias or perfectionism has made its way in through the side door, or if you're sensing that fixed mindset, or you're feeling overwhelmed, or you're navigating a lot of that self-protection energy, nothing's gone wrong. Your brain is doing what it has evolved to do for thousands of years, to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy. It is trying to protect you because it doesn't quite understand what is real danger versus perceived danger. But here's the good news. You don't have to stay in that space. You can start recognizing these patterns and understanding when you do actually require protection and when you're willing to maybe risk some discomfort, and then start shifting your focus toward what's possible instead of that sole focus on what's in the way and what's stopping you. And that is what I want to talk about next. How do we shift from problems into possibilities? And as we dive in, I want to start with this. First and foremost, it is absolutely okay. It makes sense to feel nervous about trying something new or putting yourself out there or saying the thing in a new situation. In fact, it makes me think of something my dad used to say when I'd talk about being nervous about a presentation or something. And he would say, well, if you're nervous, it means you care. And I agree. I think a little nervousness is a pretty good sign that you're doing something that matters to you. You know, as long as it's not shutting you down and keeping you from doing the thing, I like to think of it as, oh, that means I care here. I mean, think about it. If you don't care about the outcome, would you feel that twinge of nervousness? Probably not. So with that in mind, I don't think you need to eliminate fear. Fear doesn't have to pack its bags and move out completely. That would actually be unsafe. We need to have fear, right? That's an important component in keeping us safe and alive. But fear doesn't need to be in charge. It doesn't need to be driving the car. Instead, it can sit in the back seat. It can hang out back there with perfectionism, right? So what does this look like? Well, first of all, we want to allow ourselves to go to that fear place. So if you're thinking about doing something new and you notice all the yeah buts come up, yeah, but this, and really I probably shouldn't this, and I can't because of that. Ask yourself, okay, what am I really worried might actually happen here? And sit with that. Allow yourself to name the thing. What are you worried about? And we're dropping all judgment, right? Judgment's not allowed. We're just getting curious. And from there, we want to take it one step further. And we want to ask, okay, let's say that thing actually happens. Then what? What am I worried about there, and how will I respond? So for example, maybe you are afraid of sharing an idea at work, at a team meeting, because you're nervous that your coworkers are going to judge the idea. Okay, so you named the thing you're afraid of. Then what? What if that happens? How are you going to take care of yourself on the other side? So we want to name the thing and then clarify, so what? And how will you take care of yourself? Show your brain that even in the worst case scenario, if that plays out, you have a plan. And most importantly, you have your own back. You're not going to beat yourself up. You're going to take care of yourself. Eventually, you may even get to the place where you can confidently know, you know what? I'm actually going to feel so proud of myself for showing up and trying, full stop. Because trying is courageous. Okay, so this is the groundwork before we move into a handful of different strategies that I'm going to share here. So don't skip this step. We really want to first spend some time with that fear and get curious about it. What am I worried about here? And if it's something that you do want to lean into, find ways to show yourself you're going to be okay. Because it's only once we've given ourselves that space that we can then move forward and shift from that focus on the problem into possibility. So let's talk about 3 different strategies to help you make that shift. Strategy number 1 is to interrupt the pattern. So the next time that you find yourself stuck in problem mode and you're spinning on all the reasons why you can't do something or you shouldn't do something, I can't finish the script because I never have the time, or I'll never make the offer because I hate making phone calls. What we want to do is pause and interrupt that pattern by asking yourself a flip of that question. When do I want to set aside time for writing? How will I make time for that tomorrow? How could I make this sales process more enjoyable? If I improve it for myself, it's possible it'll be even better for my client? What if there's another way to sell that doesn't involve a phone call, for example? These questions redirect your focus from the obstacles to the opportunities. And when you ask those questions, notice how they feel in your body. Because even that tiny spark of curiosity, a shift toward excitement, it is worth paying attention to because it's a sign that you are moving in that direction toward possibility. And that brings us to strategy number 2, which is experimenting with equal airtime. So this strategy builds on the idea of going to the worst case scenario, like we talked about in the key foundation step. But now we're actually going to take it in another direction. So when I was trained as a coach, this concept was taught as equal airtime. And here's what I mean here. So often we let the worst case scenario take up all of our mental real estate. We think about everything that could go wrong, and we just kind of accept those fears as facts, right? That they likely will happen, and that's just kind of fate. And what we don't realize is that we actually have no idea. We have no idea what's going to happen. The exact opposite scenario could happen. Somewhere in between could happen, right? All of it is just as likely to happen as that extreme worst case scenario. So instead of focusing only on, I shouldn't try because I might do it wrong, or I would put my name in for the role, but I might tank the speech portion, or I can't ask them out because they might say no, right? If that's kind of our worst case scenarios, what I encourage you to do is give yourself equal airtime on the other side. Allow yourself to actually imagine the alternatives of what could go right. What if you do it right? What if you nail this speech? What if you ask them out and they say yes? What if it doesn't work out with them, but they introduce you to your long-term partner? What if you learn something powerful about yourself along the way that changes the trajectory of your entire career? What if you have fun? What if you enjoy yourself? By giving both outcomes equal airtime, what you're doing here is training your brain to see the positive possibilities are just as valid as those worst case scenarios. And honestly, the result is probably going to be somewhere in the middle. But when you let yourself examine both, you know you can handle all of it. Then we get to strategy 3. This is one of my favorite strategies, which is acting as if in small ways. So instead of waiting to feel quote unquote ready to try the new thing or to put yourself out there, I invite you to start acting like somebody who's already successfully done this. Been there, done that, right? So you might ask yourself, if I was already a partner at the firm, what would I be doing today? How would I address this situation? Or if I've already published several books, how would I approach this current stage in my book writing? Or if I regularly closed sales calls, what would I be thinking about on Tuesday morning when it's time to pick up the phone? Now, if you're like me, sometimes imagining yourself in the scenario feels too distant. Your brain's like, what? I will never be there. That will never be me. So if you can't picture yourself making that thing happen and your brain just stays in resistance and doubt, that's not a problem. If that's the case, it can be helpful to think of someone you admire or a respected person in the field and how they might approach that thing. What do they think about it? What do they do when they hit a snag? So for example, I might think, how would Brene Brown handle the communication issue on my team? Or how would James Patterson handle outlining the next story arc? As you find your answers, challenge yourself to lean in and take that one small step as you apply the approach yourself. As we talked about last week, one small step at a time is enough to start building that momentum. Now, the last thing I want to offer is that shifting from a greater focus on problems into a greater focus on possibility doesn't mean that we're just pretending there aren't obstacles. Of course, there are still obstacles, and we want to acknowledge those. We want to plan for them. But what we're doing here with intention is choosing to focus on where you're going more often and more intently than where and why you're stuck. So after you allow yourself to acknowledge the fear and clarify that worst case scenario and identify how you will support yourself through the situation if it happens, then try on one of these 3 strategies to help you shift into possibility. Number 1, interrupt the pattern by asking a new question from a different lens. Number 2, experiment with that equal airtime to really explore all the different possible outcomes. And then number 3, act as if in those small ways, one step at a time. Each of these strategies builds momentum, helps us regulate those big emotions, and reminds you that you're not stuck. You can absolutely move forward. So here's my challenge for you this week. Notice if and when you find yourself spinning in problem mode. Whether it's the negativity bias kicking in or overwhelm creeping up or that self-protection voice trying to keep you safe, take a pause, take a breath, ask yourself, what else might be true here? How else might I think about this? And when you do, celebrate that courage, because showing up and trying, even when it feels hard, is a win in and of itself. And as always, I would love to hear how it goes for you. Let's connect over on Instagram. I am at I'm Busy Being Awesome. You can send me a DM or leave a comment on one of the posts for this episode. I can't wait to hear about it. All right, my friends, that's going to do it for us this week. And if you are ready to take these concepts and apply them to your life, if you're ready to learn how to support your ADHD in a way that works for you, I invite you to check out today's show notes where you can learn more about how we can work together, both one-on-one and in my small group coaching program, We're Busy Being Awesome. Also, if you want to learn my simple step-by-step approach to locking in a routine and making it stick, be sure to check out my free course called the ADHD Routine Revamp. You can tap through the link in the show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/routine to sign up. Until next time, keep being awesome. I'll talk with you soon.